Hey guys, thanks for being here. Hey, I want to start a new series. I've been going through Genesis, listening to Through the Word, and I highly recommend if you don't have the app or don't know about it, it's a great way to go through the different books of the Bible. They will read it to you so you can listen to it wherever. But the best part is they do a little bit of a commentary, and it's chapter by chapter in each book of the Bible. And then there are also a bunch of other things that they can go through for devotionals and stuff like that. And I have found it extremely helpful for me. It's called Through the Word. I'll put a link in the bottom. I don't get anything out of it, but I think it's well worth you checking it out. But what it has caused me to do is to think about, I've been going through Genesis. I started with Genesis 1:1. And it's caused me to think about the different men throughout Scripture who have, well, let's just say, are flawed. But yet God called them men after his own heart, a godly man. And it got me thinking that I'm the same way. I'm flawed. I make a ton of mistakes. Yet God can still use me, and I don't have to. This is the best part for me. I don't have to clean myself up in order for God to use me. As a matter of fact, I can't clean myself up enough for God to use me. You know, God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. He's just asking for you to say, yes, I'll follow you. And so, you know, if you've been listening to Coffee and the Cross for a while, you know the podcast exists for everyday men. Everyday men who are just trying to follow Jesus here in the real world. You know, we're not pastors, although some of our guests may be. Not a theologian. I'm not a guy who even has it all figured out, right? I'm just a guy who goes to work every day. Love my family, love my wife. I have lots of responsibilities, just like all of you. We're men who are trying to lead well, but a lot of times we just feel like we're falling short. And frankly, if we're honest, that's most of us. You know, the world's trying to tell us who we're supposed to be, and unfortunately, Satan has really, really done a great job at making us feel like we're not good enough for God. And you know, maybe you carrying a quiet question somewhere in the back of your mind. You know, it may sound something like this. Am I really the kind of man God can use? Maybe you've asked that question a lot before. Maybe you've looked at your past and thought, if God was looking for someone to build something through, I ain't making the list of the top 1,000 people. And we've all made mistakes. Maybe you've lost your temper when you shouldn't have. I know I have. Maybe you've made some financial decisions that you regret. Maybe you've said some things to your wife you wish you'd take back, and frankly didn't even say to begin with. Maybe you feel like you've missed opportunities as a dad. Maybe you feel like you're just, well, average. You're not great. You're not terrible. Just a guy trying to keep things together. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you hear stories in church or have read stories about great men of faith. Abraham, Joseph, Jacob, Moses. And sometimes those stories feel like they belong to a whole different category of people. You know, they're more spiritual than me. They're the faith giants. They're men who were somehow wired differently than I am. But if you open up the book of Genesis and actually read those stories and read them carefully, something surprising shows up. These men were a mess. They lied, they cheated, they doubted, they manipulated, I can talk today, manipulated people. They ran away from responsibility. They played favorites with their kids. And they made decisions that hurt the people around them. And yet, God still used them. And that's what this series is all about. Because if history tells us anything, it's this. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And that's great news for men like us. Now, why are we starting in Genesis? Well, for the next couple episodes, I believe it's 7, I have it down to, we're going to walk through some of the men in the book of Genesis, not as Bible heroes, but as real men. Men who struggled, men who feared, men who failed, and men who had moments where they probably thought, yeah, God can't possibly use me now. And yet God kept working. We're going to look at men like Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Joseph. Each of them had a calling. Each of them had a failure. Each of them had fear. And each of them had a moment where God stepped in and began shaping them into something they couldn't become on their own. And it's crazy because if you step back for a minute and look at the pattern, you start to notice something. God builds men the same way today as he did then. He doesn't start with a perfect man. He starts with a willing man. You know, there's a lie a lot of us carry around. And it sounds a lot like, well, if I only had it all together, then God could use me. If I were more disciplined, then God could use me. God could use me if I were stronger spiritually. But hey, that's not the pattern in the scriptures. God doesn't wait for men to become impressive. He starts with men who are honest enough to admit they're not. Think about Adam, first man in human history. If there was ever a guy who had the perfect setup, it was him. Perfect environment, the perfect relationship with God. Let's face it, at the beginning, he had the perfect marriage. And then what happened? He didn't lead. He failed. Not just a little mistake. He made a decision that changed the course of human history. And when God came looking for him, Adam didn't step forward like a leader, he hid. And that's the moment every man understands. Because most men don't run toward God when they fail, they run away. They hide behind work, busyness, distractions, silence, games, drinking. And yet the story doesn't end there. God still pursued Adam. So as we walk through with these men, you'll notice a pattern, and every single one of them goes through the same cycle. There's the man, who he is, where he is in life, and what God is asking him to do. And at some point, he questioned and failed. Maybe it was a decision, a weakness, a mistake that exposed something inside of him. And then the fear. Fear of consequences. Fear of being exposed. Fear that maybe God is done with him now. And something remarkable happens. There's that turning point. That moment where God steps in. And it could be confrontational, mercy, discipline, but each time it's grace. And out of that turning point comes the leadership lesson. Something God builds into that man that wasn't there before. And finally, each story points forward to something bigger. It all points to Jesus. Because every flawed man, all the way back to Adam, is a reminder that the world was waiting for one man who wouldn't fail. The one man who wouldn't hide. The one man who would not run. Jesus. So, hey, I had a friend of mine not long ago. He's a hard worker, loved his wife, loved his kids. We were sitting for a cup of coffee one day. And he said to me, you know what? I feel like I'm always one step behind the man I'm supposed to be. We weren't talking scripture, or theology, doctrine. We were just talking about life in general. He felt like he should be fill in the blank. Maybe more patient as a dad. More attentive as a husband. More confident at work. Maybe more disciplined spiritually. Instead, he felt like he was just trying to keep up. And that's where a lot of men tend to live. Not rebellious, not abandoning their faith, just not sure. They're not sure if they're the kind of man God really builds something through. But again, if Genesis shows us anything, it's that God specializes in men like that. Men who are learning, growing, men who are willing to stay in the process. Now, each episode in this series is going to focus on one man. Again, we're going to look at who he was, where he failed, what he feared, where God met him, and what leadership came out of it and what he did. And most importantly, what the story means for you and me today. Because these aren't just ancient stories, they're mirrors. When you look at Adam, you'll see moments where you've hidden. In Abraham, moments where you've doubted. Joseph, you'll see moments where you've tried to control things instead of trusting God. Jacob, my apologies. And when you see Joseph, you'll see what faith looks like when life doesn't make sense. But through it all, we'll see something else. A faithful God. A God who keeps working in men long after they've proven they're imperfect. So if there's one idea that sits underneath the entire series, it's this. And I've said it at least twice now, but I'm going to say it again to remind myself. God qualifies the called. He does not call the qualified. He doesn't start with somebody who's finished. He shapes them, molds them through mistakes, through waiting, correction, grace. The process hasn't changed. The same God who shaped men in Genesis are still shaping men today. It just may look a little different. You may be sitting in a work truck. You may be sitting in an office. You may be a farmer out in the field. You may be sitting at a kitchen table after the kids go to bed wondering if you're doing enough. God is still building men. And before we jump into the first story in the next episode, I want to leave you with one question. Not a churchy question, a real question for you to ask yourself. Where might God be shaping you right now? Is it in your marriage? Is it your patience? Your finances? Your leadership? Your integrity when nobody's watching? Because honestly, the moments that feel like setbacks in your life are often the very places God's doing his hardest work. So next episode, we're going to start at the very beginning. We're going to start with Adam, the first man, the first leader, the first failed husband, the first failed leader, the first man to discover what happens when fear replaces responsibility. But we're also going to see God's grace in it. And that God did not abandon him, and he's not going to abandon you just because you've fallen. He's going to call you toward him. And if you've ever wondered where God can still build something through your life, Adam's story may be the place to start. So, hey, thanks for being here. Grab a cup of coffee and let's walk this out together. I'm looking forward to going through this series with you.